not going to be the GOP interview at the Senate hearing. Your resume is long and in depth. And you're obviously a capable person doing many things. And oddly, I thought you were much younger than you actually are here. You're almost the same age as me. But you've been around for a while.
I have been around.
You've seen a lot of the same things that I have in Los Angeles. You know, I've seen the city go up in flames 3 times. So, without having to get into all of that, tell me why it is a woman of your accomplishment wants to come back and deal with the complications of LA city politics to be mayor.
Well, it's really because of what you just said. You've seen the city go up and down. You've seen the city go up in flames. And I'm very worried that the city is at another one of those crossroads because we have an absolute crisis that is not being handled like it's an emergency. And so 40,000, now those numbers are old. I know it's a lot more.
Pre-pandemic.
Right. People on the street dying every day. That's an emergency. Now, back in the 90s, in 93, I was trying to work in an organization and I started Community Coalition. We were trying to work to take over motels in 93. It took a pandemic for the city
it
to
took
do
a crisis
what the city
for there to be a crisis response.
Right. We were trying to address homelessness then. When Clinton passed and the House and Senate passed welfare reform, we knew that homelessness then was going to extend to women and children.
Right.
So these are issues that I've been dealing with for a long time, but now it's metastasized to the point of being an absolute emergency, and I frankly think we need to respond to it just like we did in 94. When there was an earthquake, we rebuilt that 10 freeway in record time, didn't we?
Right. And as a crisis, what is actually the appropriate response?
Oh, I think a response that declares an emergency and that then uses the powers of that. Now, I mean, all of us are calling for an emergency, but there's an emergency on the city level, and frankly, the city charter is pretty vague as to what you can actually do. Now, sometimes that's a good thing, because when it's vague, you can kind of go, oh, I can do this. But I actually think that it needs to be much more extensive. There has to be federal intervention as well. And I can give you a couple of examples. HUD, for example, has given us thousands of vouchers, but there's regulations and restrictions on those vouchers. If you viewed it from the perspective of a natural disaster, you would say, you know what, this is an emergency. We're going to waive these regulations.
Maybe we call in FEMA.
Exactly.
Maybe we get the state to come in, and give us, National Guard tents and cots and blankets and whatnot.
No, I wouldn't want that. And because that form of shelter, like the old model shelter, we can't do anymore because we're living with a pandemic that now we're getting ready to go through the 3rd variant. Hopefully it won't be that bad, but there is another one out there. So we have to come up with a new model of temporary housing. And so I don't see that. But what I have seen, because part of what I focus on in Washington is foreign policy, and I spend time in Africa. I've been in conflict zones. I've seen what our military can do. For example, I was in one country once that was very dangerous. And so I had to stay on the compound of the ambassador. Had a nice 1-bedroom place, spent the night, arrived at night, woke up in the morning and found out I was in a container. No one would have ever known that I was in a container.
However, if you were to deal with the United Nations and you had a refugee crisis, they would come in with these nice, clean, United Nations tents, and they'd have sanitation facilities, and they'd give everybody cot and blankets and pillows, and then they'd provide them services.
I've been to those. Those camps many times, and that is true. That's how they deal with the refugees. But right outside of the camps is where the staff stays, and so the staff stays in housing, and it's temporary housing that's built. I would never want to see in the United States what I've seen in refugee camps.
are not our homeless economic refugees?
Well, you know what, one thing, and this has happened a lot right now, and I'm concerned about it, is that the people that are unhoused are painted as one brush, and
Right, no, but
they're
they're
there
not.
for multiple reasons.
Yeah.
There absolutely are people who are there for just straight economics. If you could help them get back on their foot, that's fine.
Yeah.
But you know what, if it were you or I, and I was on the street for a few days, I might develop a few other problems too.
Oh, yeah, no, there's, you know, when I have been confronted by people who say, oh, these are just, you know, criminals and pedophiles out there, I say, no.
Mm-hmm.
I've studied the problem.
Mm-hmm.
There are like at least 8 or 9 different drivers
Exactly.
of what the homeless is, and what you are trying to do is solve this with a 3-point plan,
Right, well,
and it doesn't work that way.
yeah, oh yeah, exactly, what other people are trying to, I'm not trying to solve it with a 3-point plan, but no, you're absolutely
No,
right.
this is what Mr.
Right.
Buscaini is
Oh, yeah.
trying to do
Yeah.
with his, you know, sweep the sidewalk.
Citations, yeah.
Yeah, and it's,
You know, so what I have focused on in Congress and in the State House,
Right.
as you mentioned, the drivers,
Mhm.
I've been trying to focus on the drivers, so 2 drivers that I
all the
focus
way
on.
back to the crack cocaine
Exactly, exactly,
epidemic that was caused by all of that stuff in Central America. Yes, Freeway, Ricky
yeah, Ricky Ross.
Ross and the
Yeah.
whole bit. So that really bodes in your favor of understanding the history of how we get here.
Yes,
And you cannot solve the problem if you don't know what was the
what
precedent.
caused the problem, absolutely,
Right,
so.
right.
So I have focused on the child welfare system because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, one category are kids that we take care of them until they're 18, and then we kick them on the curb,
Right.
kick them to the curb.
And then
and then-
7% of the kids in LAUSD are homeless.
Yeah,
And the school district actually has extra land
mhm,
that they could actually build
Mhm.
supportive housing on.
mhm.
So let's move on a little bit, because I know your time's limited.
Okay.
So before you got into the race,
Mhm.
this race was about Joe Busciano versus Mike Fuhrer.
Mhm.
And it was a clear division amongst what I guess you would say would be the conservative Democrat versus the liberal Democrat, okay? And Mr. Fuhrer has a well thought out plan for dealing with homelessness.
Mhm.
The race right now
Mhm.
suddenly becomes you, a lifelong Democrat,
Mhm.
against a billionaire that wants to buy the election. And the only difference between this billionaire and the last billionaire is that this guy's not a grifter. Okay?
Right.
I mean, he's the real deal. He's got his own
Yes.
money.
Yes.
How are you gonna deal with that?
Well, you know what, I mean, I think that the city will be poised with a clear choice. First of all, I don't just view it as between me and Rick Caruso. Joe is still in, Mike is still in, and Kevin is still in.
Right.
So we can talk after June to see what happens.
Right.
But I think the city has to decide, because, you know, he is spending $1 million a week. And I think that there are 2 very different views of the city. I think that he paints a very dark, terrible view. You know, the city's gone to hell in a handbasket.
Yeah.
Yes, dystopic view of the city. I don't feel that way. I feel the city absolutely has serious problems, but this is a hopeful place. We have all of the resources, the skills, the knowledge here. We can solve these problems, but the only way we're gonna solve these problems is by bringing the city together. Otherwise, those periods that
Okay.
you talked about.
And because of your community organizing background,
Mhm.
tell me why you are the one that can do that, kind of
Sure.
bringing the community together.
Because I have spent the last 3+ decades doing exactly that. I work with Republicans in Washington, D.C.
Oh my God.
I work with some of the Republicans that you see on Fox TV.
You
We
and
do-
Janice Hahn.
Yes, exactly. You're
Right?
my buddy, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
our
She was
buddy.
known for that. She was known for that in DC, and I'm known for that in DC.
Right.
My point is that the way I work is I keep my eyes on the prize and I compartmentalize. I don't care if you're on Hannity that night bashing one thing or another. The question is, how do you feel about this legislation that we're working on?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, so you think you can reach across the aisle, but
Yeah.
in
I have
Los
no idea.
Angeles,
Mhm.
what are the aisles to reach across?
No, well, you know what, it's not party, it's situation. And, there, because, number one, you cannot come into this office and say the reason why I'm gonna be successful is because I'm gonna demand everybody to do what I want.
Right.
Those 15 members of the council were elected in their own right, and you have to bring them together. Well, I have experience with that too, but not with 15, with 80.
Yeah.
When I was Speaker of the House, I had to bring folks together.
It's really not the city council.
Mm-hmm.
It's the city bureaucracy.
Bureaucracy, right, that's right.
And you've come up against that in your previous life of having to deal with stuff. It's sort of this paternalistic, top down,
Mm-hmm.
everybody's in their own silo. And the only mayor of Los Angeles that I have ever known that has made that system work is Mayor Jimmy Hahn.
Mm-hmm.
And when he came into office, he actually brought the department heads down to the district level and said, look at guys, you all have your various, responsibilities and here's what the community problems are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We're gonna meet every month
Mm-hmm.
in each district and we're gonna solve this
Well, that's
district's
nice.
problem.
That's a very nice idea. I'll have to call him up.
You should, because it's the only thing that actually
Yeah, that's a wonderful idea.
ended
That's a
up working,
wonderful
but he
approach.
he was only in for one term
Right.
and it didn't stick.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But he held the department heads responsible
Mm-hmm.
to the local needs. And then, of course, we ended up with a neighborhood council system in which it's now being ignored
Mm-hmm.
because nobody wants to hear a bunch of yahoos complaining about what's not getting done in the city, right?
Right. Well, one thing about neighborhood councils is that it's really uneven. I mean, some of them are highly organized and some of them are 5 or 6 people, that have control over the neighborhood process. So one thing I would like to do is to evaluate the whole thing.
Neighborhood councils are the kindergarten of democracy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a nice way of looking at it.
And it's supposed to be from the bottom up,
Uh-huh.
not the top down. And
Right.
because I've been on a neighborhood council for
Mhm.
10 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And what we get is this top down, thou shalt,
Yeah, right.
and there's these edicts and sometimes
The edicts come from the neighborhood people or from the city?
from the city.
Oh, yeah.
Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. I mean, we
Yeah.
have a person that is now a department head there that some people call a fascist.
Oh, my
Okay.
God, wow.
Just because of her,
Jeez. Oh, it's a woman.
it's a woman.
Oh, my.
And I mean, the term gets bandied about a lot these days, but it is very authoritarian. The city of Los Angeles is a top-down organization.
Mm-hmm.
And there needs to be some more connectivity between what happens at the top and the dreams and aspirations of the people at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you one more question here and I'll let you go. I know you got people out here. Have you been, have you taken the time to get briefed on the Port of Los Angeles issues dealing with contracting at the port and some of those issues, as well as the major butane issue over on Gaffney Street?
Yeah, I was horrified by that issue. I was shocked. It was actually here
Yeah.
that I learned about that. And in terms of the port, yes, I've had a couple of briefings on the port. I'm not sure about that particular issue that you've mentioned.
Right.
But I absolutely have, because, a couple of months ago when we had the backlog, which we still do. And the environmental piece, it's not so much about the contracting.
Well, the contracting is a subset of the zero emission issue.
Uh-huh.
And it is very tangled up in a whole bunch of very specific political issues amongst some very well-entrenched players within the Port of Los Angeles. And if you at some point would like to have a little deeper understanding of this,
Okay.
okay, I people I could introduce you to would get could brief you on those sorts of things so that you have a full understanding of it. But what the big picture is, we have a $400 billion a year industry down here.
Yeah,
$400 billion.
that's unbelievable.
And most of the profit of that
Goes
offshore.
Yeah.
And we have some very well-paid, high-paid, blue-collar workers down here that have the best healthcare plan in the nation.
Yes.
And then we got a whole bunch of truckers
Yeah.
who like aren't even like deemed employees, and there's a whole, you know,
Right.
filters down.
Right.
There's this port is one of the huge economic drivers of this region.
Yeah. 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 That I'm aware.
And yet, the benefit to the local community
Yes.
ends up being next to nothing, even when you consider the $1.5 billion of payroll
Wow.
and benefits that the longshoremen get.
Yeah.
That's less than 0.5% of the gross revenue.
Wow. Woo. That puts it in a whole nother light.
It does. And when I hear people complain about how wealthy or how much these longshoremen get paid, I say, well, wait a minute.
They earn every dollar.
If I, as an employer, could get away with spending less than 0.5%
Yeah.
on payroll and benefits,
Yeah.
I'd be sitting fat and happy. The city doesn't even get away with that kind of
Right.
percentage rate.
Right.
So,
Well, thank you.
there are
Oh.
huge environmental issues down here that
Yes.
you've been told about.
Yes. Yes.
It affects not only Los Angeles, but all of Southern California,
Yeah.
and in fact the world, in terms of if we can solve these problems here,
Right.
not only would they be job creators, but they would be exportable to every place, because LA is the leader in this issue. And that's the kind of leadership that the city of Los Angeles needs.
Well, and my view is that if 40% of the goods of the nation flow through here, the federal government really needs to up its game too.
Oh, yes.
In terms of the investment. We're spending a lot of money with the infrastructure deal and all, but we need to do more.
Yeah, great.
Nice talking to you.
Congresswoman, soon to be mayor, Karen Bass, thank you for your time today,
You're welcome.
and good luck with this campaign, okay?
Thank you.
There is a woman that you will